The story of the president who was afraid of light switches does not begin in the gilded halls of the White House, but on a blood-soaked hillside in northern Georgia. It is May 13, 1864, and Colonel Benjamin Harrison of the 70th Indiana Volunteer Infantry is preparing for what he calls his first great battle. The air is thick with the metallic scent of impending conflict, a tension that settles deep in the bones of the thousands of Union soldiers poised to assault the Confederate defenses at Resaca. Harrison, a man born into America's political royalty, is now just another officer facing the stark possibility of his own mortality. That evening, by the flickering light of a campfire, he pens a letter to his wife, Caroline. His words are not those of a man destined for the presidency, but of a husband and father steeling himself for the worst. "I send up to God this night," he writes, "that should you lose a husband and they a father in the fight, that you may find abundant consolation. Let your grief be tempered by the consolation that I died for my country." 2 days later, on May 15th, the abstract fear of battle becomes a visceral reality. General William T. Sherman's grand assault on the center of the Confederate line has stalled, pinned down by a single brutally effective artillery position. It is the Cherokee Battery, commanded by Captain Maximilian Vanden Corpet, a 4-gun redoubt bristling with 12-pound Napoleon cannons. The position is a fortress in miniature, dug into the earth just 80 yards ahead of the main Confederate trenches, and protected by 3 infantry regiments in rifle pits with 4 more in the main works behind them. It is a killing ground, and it is Harrison's objective. His brigade commander orders an assault, and Harrison's 70th Indiana is chosen to lead the charge. In his after-action report, Harrison describes the moment with the cool precision of a lawyer and the understated courage of a soldier. He forms his men in a ravine opposite the enemy guns, a brief moment of cover before the inevitable rush into a storm of iron. Then the order comes. Harrison leads his regiment out of the gully and into the open. "I moved my men at the double quick and, with loud cheers, across the open space," he wrote. "They are immediately met with a devastating enfilading fire from their right, but there is no hesitation. They charge up the steep, wooded hill straight toward the source of the greatest danger. The Confederate cannons belch their deadly charges of grape and canister, a spray of metal projectiles that tears through the air and the men around him. Harrison and his soldiers press on, reaching what he called the very muzzles of the enemy's artillery. The Union troops sweep over the earthen parapet, and the fight devolves into a brutal, intimate struggle of bayonets and fists. They overwhelm the Confederate gunners in savage hand-to-hand combat, silencing the battery that had held an entire Union army at bay. For a fleeting moment, it is a stunning victory. Harrison's regiment is the first to breach the enemy works. But the triumph is short-lived. Now exposed and isolated, the 70th Indiana is subjected to what Harrison termed a most destructive fire from the main Confederate line just yards away. They are forced to take cover behind the very earthworks they had just captured. The 4 Napoleon cannons sit in a contested no-man's land, a prize neither side can claim until the cover of darkness allows Union soldiers to sneak forward and drag the guns back to their lines. For his leadership and manifested energy and gallantry at Resaca and later at the Battle of Peachtree Creek, Harrison was praised by General Sherman and promoted to Brevet Brigadier General. In later years, he would confess that he preferred the title of general to that of president, explaining that he had risked far more to earn it. This was the man who would one day occupy the executive mansion, a leader who did not flinch from charging directly into cannon fire, a soldier who earned his rank through courage under the most extreme pressure imaginable. It is a portrait of resolve and bravery that creates a profound and compelling question. How could this man, the hero of Resaca, become the president who was afraid of a simple light switch? This act of battlefield courage provides the crucial context for the entire story that follows. It establishes that Benjamin Harrison was not a man defined by fear, but by a calculated and disciplined approach to risk. Before he was the hero of Resaca or the 23rd President of the United States, Benjamin Harrison was the inheritor of a name that echoed through the very foundations of the American Republic. He was born into a political dynasty, a living vessel of a legacy that was both a tremendous asset and a crushing weight. His great-grandfather, Benjamin Harrison V, was a wealthy Virginia planter who had signed the Declaration of Independence. His grandfather was William Henry Harrison, Old Tippecanoe, the hero of the War of 1812 and the nation's 9th president. This lineage instilled in young Benjamin a profound sense of purpose, a quiet conviction that he was, as one historian noted, destined for greatness. This destiny, however, would be pursued not with the charismatic flair of his ancestors, but with the cold, methodical diligence that would come to define his entire life. Raised on a farm in North Bend, Ohio, Harrison's childhood was comfortable but not lavish. He was educated by private tutors and spent countless hours in his grandfather's library, developing a deep intellectual curiosity and a preference for the company of books over people. After graduating with honors from Miami University at the age of 19, he chose a career in law, a profession perfectly suited to his meticulous and analytical mind. In 1854, he moved to Indianapolis with his new wife, Caroline Scott, to build a practice from scratch. The early years were a struggle. To make ends meet, he took a job as a court crier, earning a meager $2.50 per day. Yet he persevered, building a reputation as a formidable attorney. A law partner later reflected, "He is a hard worker, giving to every case the best of his skill and labor, so that he never went unprepared." This same thoroughness characterized his slow but steady ascent in the new Republican Party. He served as city attorney, secretary of the Republican State Committee, and reporter for the Indiana Supreme Court. He approached politics as he did the law, with exhaustive preparation and intellectual rigor. While he developed an effective public speaking style, his private demeanor was another matter entirely. He was described as frigid, stiff, and aloof, a man so emotionally reserved that he was privately dubbed the human iceberg by his own staff. This was not a man who radiated warmth or courted public affection. He commanded respect through intellect and duty. This perception of him as a detached, almost clinical figure was reinforced by a peculiar political liability. During his unsuccessful 1876 campaign for governor of Indiana, Democrats seized upon the fact that he often wore gloves, a necessity due to a lifelong skin irritation on his hands. They derisively nicknamed him Kid Gloves Harrison, painting him as an effete aristocrat out of touch with the common man. The moniker, though unfair, stuck because it seemed to capture an essential truth about his personality. He was a man who seemed to keep the world at arm's length, both physically and emotionally. His career continued its deliberate climb. He was elected to the United States Senate in 1881, where he championed causes that would later define his presidency: pensions for Civil War veterans, conservation of Western lands, and a modernized Navy. He also demonstrated a principled independence, breaking with his party to oppose the Chinese Exclusion Act of 1882, a piece of popular but discriminatory legislation. His was a career built not on charisma, but on competence. He was a man defined by caution and control. He suffered at least 2 physical breakdowns from overwork, a testament to his relentless drive. He approached every challenge, be it a legal case, a political campaign, or his own health, with the same careful, risk-averse mindset. This deeply ingrained prudence, this need to understand and manage every variable, was the central feature of his character. It was the very quality that made him a brave and effective soldier, a successful lawyer, and a respected senator. It was also the quality that would set the stage for his legendary encounter with a technology that was anything but controllable. In 1889, Benjamin Harrison entered the White House, having defeated the incumbent Grover Cleveland not through rousing cross-country tours, but through one of America's first front porch campaigns. Delegations of supporters would travel to his home in Indianapolis. where the reserved candidate would deliver short, prepared speeches from the comfort of his own property. The style was perfectly suited to the human iceberg, allowing him to project authority without the strain of glad-handing and public intimacy. He was now president of a nation in the throes of a profound and often violent transformation. The Gilded Age was a period of dazzling invention and staggering wealth, an era when the United States was transforming from a rural, agrarian society into an urban, industrial powerhouse. It was an age of railroads, steel mills, and sprawling cities, but also of labor strikes, financial panics, and a widening chasm between the fabulously rich and the desperately poor. Harrison's presidency stood squarely at this crossroads of progress and anxiety. His administration was defined by an unprecedented scale of federal action. Congress, under Republican control, began spending money at a rate never before seen in peacetime. When critics assailed what they called the billion-dollar Congress, the powerful Speaker of the House, Thomas B. Reed, delivered a retort that would define the era. This is a billion-dollar country. That $1 billion was not squandered. It was invested in building a modern nation. Harrison personally championed and presided over a massive expansion of the United States Navy. Recognizing that America's growing commercial power required a credible military presence on the world's oceans, his administration transformed the Navy from a collection of aging Civil War-era vessels into a modern steel fleet, elevating its global rank from 20th to 5th in just 4 years. He was also an architect of the nation's physical expansion, admitting 6 new states to the Union: North Dakota, South Dakota, Montana, Washington, Idaho, and Wyoming, more than any other president in American history. Harrison's legislative record further cemented his role as a modernizer. In 1890, he signed into law the Sherman Antitrust Act, the first federal statute designed to curb the power of the massive corporate monopolies, or trusts, that had come to dominate the American economy. While its initial enforcement was weak, it established the principle that the government had a role to play in regulating big business. He also supported the controversial McKinley Tariff, which raised import duties to historic highs to protect American industries. This policy created a large surplus in the U.S. Treasury but also contributed to rising consumer prices and growing public discontent, which would ultimately cost him his re-election. Beyond the grand legislative battles, Harrison demonstrated a forward-thinking sensibility that often placed him ahead of his time. He was an early advocate for conservation, using his authority to create the first national forest reserves. He endorsed federal legislation aimed at protecting the voting rights of African Americans in the South and appointed the famed abolitionist Frederick Douglass as the U.S. Minister to Haiti, relying on his counsel frequently. He was also a president who embraced new technology. In 1889, his voice was captured on a wax phonograph cylinder, making him the first president whose voice was recorded for posterity. Far from being a man stuck in the past, Benjamin Harrison was an active agent of progress. He was a leader who saw the United States emerging as a global power and worked to build the institutions and infrastructure to support that destiny. This clear record of embracing modernization and technological advancement makes his personal apprehension about one specific, world-changing technology all the more striking. His story is not that of a Luddite fearing the future. It is the more complex and fascinating story of a forward-looking man confronting a new force that seemed to defy the very principles of order and predictability upon which he had built his life and career. While President Harrison was navigating the political currents of a modernizing America, a different kind of war was being waged across the country, a battle for the nation's electrical future. It was a vicious corporate and public relations feud known as the War of the Currents, and it would fundamentally shape the public's perception of the invisible force that was about to enter their homes. This conflict is the essential and often forgotten context that transforms Harrison's later caution from a personal quirk into a deeply rational response to a climate of manufactured terror and genuine danger. The electrical age in America had begun in earnest on September 4, 1882, when Thomas Edison flipped a switch at his Pearl Street generating station and illuminated a small section of lower Manhattan with his incandescent bulbs. Edison's system used direct current, DC, which flowed in a single direction at a low, relatively safe voltage. Its major drawback was its limited range. DC power could not be transmitted more than a mile, requiring a power station on nearly every city block, a costly proposition. A rival system soon emerged, championed by the industrialist George Westinghouse and based on the brilliant inventions of Nikola Tesla: alternating current, AC. AC could be stepped up by transformers to extremely high voltages, transmitted efficiently over long distances, and then stepped down again for home use. It was cheaper, more scalable, and the clear choice for building a national grid. But its reliance on high voltage was its Achilles heel. Edison, seeing his DC empire threatened, seized on this vulnerability and launched what one historian called a savage propagandist media war to convince the public that AC was lethally dangerous. Edison's campaign was shockingly unethical. His associates, led by an engineer named Harold P. Brown, began staging gruesome public demonstrations. They would gather reporters and onlookers to witness stray dogs, calves, and even horses being electrocuted to death with high-voltage AC supplied by Westinghouse generators. These spectacles were designed to create horrifying headlines and forever associate alternating current with agonizing death. Edison's most cynical tactic was to secretly consult with New York state authorities to promote AC as the ideal method for a new form of capital punishment: the electric chair. By ensuring that the state's first execution machine was powered by a Westinghouse generator, Edison's camp successfully branded his rival's technology as the executioner's current. The first execution, in 1890, was a horrifying, botched affair that only amplified the public's terror. The fear was not entirely manufactured. The rapid, unregulated proliferation of electrical wires created real hazards. In the spring of 1888, a media furor erupted over a series of deaths caused by fallen high-voltage AC arc lighting wires in New York City. Newspapers ran sensational stories of linemen and innocent pedestrians being killed instantly by this invisible power. The technology of household wiring itself was primitive and terrifying by modern standards. Early systems were often ungrounded, using what was known as knob and tube wiring. Bare electrical wires, sometimes insulated with flammable materials like cloth or paper, were strung through walls and attics, held away from the wooden beams by ceramic knobs. A frayed wire or a curious rodent could easily start a fire. The switches themselves were crude mechanisms that often produced a visible spark and a loud pop when operated. For a public already primed by Edison's propaganda to see electricity as an untamed and lethal force, every spark, every hum from a wire was a potential threat. This was the world that greeted the arrival of electricity. It was not seen as a benign convenience, but as a powerful, almost magical force, one that could light up a city or stop a heart with equal ease. In 1891, the currents of progress and fear flowed directly into the White House. President Benjamin Harrison, the man who had modernized the Navy and expanded the nation, made the decision to bring the ultimate symbol of modernity into the executive mansion: electric light. The contract was awarded to the Edison General Electric Company, the very firm at the center of the public campaign to define electricity's image. The installation, however, was far from the clean, seamless process one might expect for the nation's most famous residents. It was, in fact, a crude and almost haphazard affair that perfectly embodied the era's uncertain relationship with the new technology. The project was conceived as an add-on to the more extensive wiring of the neighboring state, war, and Navy building. A single generator was installed in that building's basement, and the electrical wires were unceremoniously strung across the lawn before being fed into the White House under a conservatory. Inside, the work was invasive and messy. Rather than using surface-mounted conduits, workers gouged deep channels directly into the historic plaster walls to bury the wires, filling the stately rooms with a storm of dust. Plasterers and painters followed, patching over the scars of progress. Even the installers had little faith in the reliability of their own work. The new electric lights were intended merely as a supplement to the existing, and far more trusted, gaslight fixtures. The interface for this new power was a series of simple round switches installed in each room. These were not the silent, safe switches of today. They were ungrounded mechanical toggles that physically broke a live connection, often with an audible pop and a visible blue spark, a miniature lightning storm in the wall. Among the Edison crew sent to perform this historic installation was a 19-year-old electrician named Irwin Hood, Ike Hoover. He was an eyewitness to the moment when the President of the United States came face-to-face with the ghost in his new machine. When the work was complete, the Harrison family gathered to inspect the marvel. But their reaction was not one of unalloyed wonder. It was one of profound apprehension. President Harrison and First Lady Caroline Harrison, having read the same terrifying newspaper accounts and witnessed the same public anxiety as every other American, were deeply suspicious of the forces now lurking within their walls. According to Hoover's later memoirs, the first family were actually afraid to turn the lights on and off for fear of getting a shock. They flatly refused to touch the switches. The president, who had charged a cannon battery at Resaca, would not risk contact with a small, round toggle on the wall. His caution was not born of ignorance, but of a clear-eyed assessment of the risks. He understood the primitive nature of the installation and the well-publicized dangers of the current it carried. His reaction was that of a prudent man, not a coward. And so, a new and peculiar duty was added to the responsibilities of the White House domestic staff. They became the official operators of the light switches. The Harrisons would summon a servant whenever they wished for a room to be illuminated or darkened. Recognizing the family's deep-seated anxiety, the White House asked young Ike Hoover to stay on after the installation was complete, to become a permanent member of the staff. His first official job in what would become a 42-year career was simply to make the first family feel safe, to stand between the President of the United States and the unpredictable spark in the wall. Life in the newly electrified White House settled into a strange new routine. The magnificent glow of incandescent bulbs now filled the parlors and halls, but for the first family, this modern marvel was a force to be managed at a distance. The simple act of lighting a room, once a matter of striking a match to a gas jet, now required summoning a servant. This peculiar arrangement became the daily reality of the Harrison administration. Ike Hoover, the young electrician who had been hired to soothe the family's fears, recalled the absurdity of the situation. The Harrisons, he wrote, were not only afraid of the light switches but also of the new electric bell system that had been installed at the same time. This fear was so pervasive that it gave rise to the most enduring part of the legend, that the Harrisons would often go to sleep with the lights in their bedroom blazing, preferring to waste the electricity rather than risk touching a switch in the dark. Hoover himself recounted that if no staff member was available in the evening, the lights in the main parlors and halls would simply burn until I returned the next morning to extinguish them. The story, filtered through the memoirs of staff members like Hoover, offers a unique glimpse into the collision of public duty and private anxiety. While Hoover's accounts are invaluable, it is worth noting that such memoirs can be prone to exaggeration and hearsay, polished over time to create a more compelling narrative. Yet the core of the story remains undisputed. The president and his family were genuinely afraid. In the broader public sphere, this caution would have been largely understood. The late 19th century was rife with suspicion about new technologies, and anti-electricity cartoons depicted the current as a skeletal figure of death. For a public conditioned by the War of the Currents, the president's behavior was likely seen as prudent. However, for Harrison's political opponents, it would have been another piece of ammunition. The Democrats, who had already successfully branded him as the aloof Kid Gloves Harrison and the diminutive Little Ben, could easily weave this new anecdote into their caricature of a president who was physically and temperamentally removed from the bold, risk-taking spirit of America. Harrison's fear of electrocution was not an isolated quirk, but part of a larger pattern of profound caution. He was haunted by the legacy of his grandfather, William Henry Harrison, who had died of pneumonia just 1 month after delivering a lengthy inaugural address in freezing weather. Determined to avoid the same fate, Benjamin Harrison reportedly wore a complete armor of chamois under his suit to his own inauguration, a private precaution against a perceived family vulnerability. Whether facing a deadly virus or an unpredictable current, his instinct was to assess the threat and erect a defense. He was a man who left nothing to chance. Ultimately, this single humanizing story of his fear has come to dominate his place in popular memory, almost completely eclipsing a presidency of significant consequence. Benjamin Harrison is rarely remembered as the president who signed the Sherman Antitrust Act, who created the national forests, or who built the modern American Navy. He is, instead, immortalized by this strange and intimate detail. He was the president who was afraid of light switches. It is a powerful testament to the nature of history itself, where a simple, relatable anecdote about human fear can resonate more loudly through the generations than a complex legacy of policy and progress. The story sticks not because it reveals a coward, but because it reveals a man, standing at the dawn of a new age, warily eyeing the ghost in the machine. In the quiet of the night, long after the president and his family had retired, the electric lights of the White House often continued to burn, a silent, glowing monument to their master's caution.